Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle and thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com as well as the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel. I'm joined today by Russ Camarda. He is an actor and filmmaker that I've gotten to know over the years through his work. And since we tend to have some time to our hands right now with everybody basically more or less on lockdown due to COVID-19. I thought it would be good to get some people in to talk about their work and just talk about movies in general. With Russ, he actually sent me a short film that he was in called Taxi Cab Ride with Jesus, which when it's available either through festival or online, I highly recommend checking it out. It's one that really had an effect on me personally, and I'm glad to be talking to him here today. Russ, thank you very much for joining me.
Hey, Brian, thank you so much for having me. It's always great to talk to fellow cinephiles, and I'm always excited to talk about that stuff. So thanks for having me.
No problem. We actually go back a ways. You sent me Night for Day
Yeah,
way back in 2009, and
that's right.
and I've gotten to watch several other films that you've either been in or have made over the years, and I know that when we follow each other on social media. I mean, whenever you have a new project, it's always kind of interesting to see what you're working on, and uh, what led to you getting into acting and filmmaking?
Well, Brian, yeah, we do go back a ways. That was maybe my second feature back then that I had ever done that I directed, and that was 2008, 2009. But my acting and my interest in that business and that craft goes back to when I was a little kid. I mean, I've always wanted to be an actor and filmmaker and director and all those things. So when I got out of high school, I live in New York, so I studied the craft, all different kinds of techniques, and got into theater. I did a lot of theater back in the early '90s into the early 2000s. Um, and then right after 9/11, basically, I was working I was doing theater at night. I was doing Shakespeare in New York uptown, and downtown I was working as an administrative office manager for a trading firm right across the street from the World Trade Center.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there when all that went down, and that kind of while I was working and doing and performing as an actor in theater on the side, I was kind of building up a video business and a video production business. But 9/11 really kind of helped push me out and said, you really got to, you don't belong here. If there was ever a wake up call.
Yeah.
So I really went wholeheartedly after that into the video business and started doing more film work, and so I still do it to this day. I still pursue it. I still push it, and wherever I can get a project going, I do it. But I've been doing it for almost 30 years now.
Do you have a website that people can check out your films at?
Well, all the films are different. I mean, there's a few of them. I mean, if you Google me or IMDb me, or even go to Amazon Prime and type in my name, you'll see about three features on there, and a bunch of shorts. A lot of the other films and things never were distributed. Or they were, so I'm kind of spread out all over the place. If you want more information basically about me, you can just go to russcamarda.com. So it's russcamarda.com, and you'll see a little more information about me with some interviews and some trailers and videos and stuff. But like I said, you can find a lot of my stuff on Amazon Prime. Just typing in my name, you'll find a bunch of films there, and I think there's got to be 3 or 4 features on there and maybe a few shorts, but the whole rest of them are all spread out all over the place.
Who were some of the actors or filmmakers that inspired you to get into filmmaking?
Well, I mean, I have such a varied group that they're all different, and I mean, the early actors when I was younger were the guys from the '70s, the Pacinos and De Niros, and those guys, Robert Duvall. Those actors really inspired me. And then as I got into the craft and learned it more, I think some of my favorite ones, that there's so many. I mean, there's so many that just fascinate me. And Anthony Hopkins is probably my favorite of all. I mean, he's one of my big inspirations. And some of the more modern guys, the Benicio del Toro's and Joaquin Phoenix's and Daniel Day-Lewis's, you can't take your eyes off them. They're fascinating to watch. There's so many. And as far as filmmakers, I mean, I have my own sort of way of doing things, and the ones I admire usually tend to be ones that are that were totally different than I would. Kubrick, Michael Mann, Tarkovsky, P.T. Anderson, so many that are just brilliant technical visual filmmakers that inspire me with their work. So I spread it across a wide range.
Yeah, and I mean that definitely covers a lot of ground, both as far as actors and filmmakers. What is it that this can be as an actor or as a filmmaker, what is it that draws you to? Is there a particular type of story that you find yourself drawn to, or are there any particular genres that you find yourself drawn to more often than not?
That's an interesting question. I think the most important thing, just from my training as an actor and what I learned in the theater and what I've developed as a director, is the most important thing to me is story. In other words, what is it about? What are you trying to say? Plots and genres, I can kind of go anywhere you want there. I can enjoy anything from a Western to science fiction to a horror picture. It doesn't really matter, as long as the story underneath the plot has something to say. So, and the stories, I think they change at different parts of your life. What draws you to them. I tend to like redemption stories. I like. I and particularly in my own work, I've even noticed that a lot of the stuff that I write and do usually ends up with some sort of hope at the end, even if it's left unresolved or unfinished. There is a hope. So I tend to have an optimistic view, and usually there's some kind of redemption story that intrigues me.
Okay. I want to go back and go way back, and when you sent me Night for Day back in 2009,
Sure.
I think one of the things that interested me about that is that it was a very modern take on genre and horror and vampires and that type of idea, and that's one of the things. Where did that movie? Where was the inspiration that came? What inspired you to make that movie?
Well, I was looking to do I had two thoughts in my head. I was looking to do something that, as far as a budget-wise and as far as what I could corral as an independent filmmaker, something that would, and also as a story point, something that would lock between sunset and sunrise. Kind of an overnight picture, like After Hours or American Graffiti or something like that. I love the idea of something happening all in one night. And I really didn't, but I wanted the stakes to be high. So the first thing that came to my mind between sunset and sunrise was vampires. Now, I am not a horror genre aficionado. I'm not. I mean, I like it. I'll watch stuff, and
Yeah.
as particularly if it's well written, I enjoy it. But it's not something I would normally go to. But the borders I was trying to create a story around, that just seemed like the highest possible stakes because, if you don't make it to sunrise as a vampire, you're not going to do very well. So, and I was coming home from a gig one night on the train, and I was looking out the window and I was listening to, I forget what the tune was, but something about the lonely streets. It was late at night, and the lights whizzing by, and the early morning hour, deep dark of the night. I just thought of I thought of a musician, a gig worker who was coming back from a gig, and I'm like, all right, that's our vampire. He's been able to hide as a musician his whole life, and what's his stakes? And the stakes had to be love. It had to be a love story. It had to be the only thing that could move him to take the risk of getting to the daytime would be somebody who was in love with him. And that's where the plot came from. This woman who had met him in a club and fallen in love with him, and decided that she was ready to have it move forward, and she didn't know who he was or what his real deal was. He was able to keep it from her, and her ultimatum was, look, if this relationship's going to go forward, you have to meet me at my beach house, tomorrow. And meet my family or whatever she was trying to do, but that meant he had to be there in the daytime. So that's where the whole plot was his journey from the night to the morning, and all the obstacles he would face, and the other vampire folks in his life who would try and convince him otherwise, and was it worth it, and that kind of a thing. So it was really about sort of my tag phrase, which is be bold, and mighty forces will come to your aid. And you just jump off the edge and see what happens, take a chance. And so that's what the story was about. The genre happened to be vampires, and I changed a lot of the mythology of the typical vampire picture at the time. I kind of turned it into sort of, they weren't undead or spiritual or there was no supernatural thing. They were just literally the next step in evolution. They were a human mutation that had lived in the fringes of society, and there were good ones and there were bad ones, and he was trying to be one of the good ones, and so it evolved from there. And like I said, the most important thing was the story of taking a chance in your life, and it came at a point in my life when I was trying to do that as well. So that's where it all came from.
What was it that sort of led you to directing some of your own films? I mean, most of the films I've seen you of yours are primarily as an actor, but you have worked on writing. You have worked as a writer, producer, and a director. What was it that led you to take that plunge into directing?
Well, I mean, like I said, I started in the theater in the 90s and then into the early 2000s, and I directed a lot and I acted a lot, and then I did both on several occasions. I directed myself in a lot of theater, in everything from Shakespeare to Williams to all kinds of things. So I was used to that, and it's actually a little easier to do it in film than it is to do in the theater. So I knew once I started to really get into creating these pictures, I knew how to do that. The other thing too is it's a trust thing anyway. When you're building a team to create such you have to have so many people cooperating. So it's just one less person you got to worry about. It's somebody you know is going to show up on time and do what you need to be done. And what you do is you surround yourself with creative people that you trust, who can be those second set of eyes, who you can say, hey, look, this is what I'm trying to do in this moment. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to set this whole scene. I'm going to jump into my thing. Take a look at playback. This is what I was looking to achieve. Do you think I got it? And then if those people you trust say, yeah, I think you got it, there's no need for you to look at it. You just move on. So it's a logistic thing. But the truth is, acting, directing, teaching, editing, all those things are very separate crafts. But if you can do each one of them individually over a long period of time, individually, well, then there's no reason you can't do them all together. It just becomes a time management issue and a logistical issue. So I was used to it in the theater. It was actually harder to do in the theater, but I was used to it, and it translated real well to the film set.
Well, that actually it's interesting hearing you talk about day for night or night for day, and hearing you as a director who also happens to act, because some of those things do lead me into some of the things that I found most striking about the most recent film of yours that I watched, Taxi Cab Ride with Jesus, because the writer and director of that movie, Dave Brennan, is also acting in that film, and
yes.
You are acting in that film as well. And one of the things that I really liked about Night for Day is also one of the things that I really liked about Taxi Cab Ride for Jesus with Jesus is because of the fact that it basically takes the ideas of a particular genre or particular type of story and sort of boils it down to its essence.
Right.
But also it doesn't lean into formula necessarily when it does that. And I think that's one of the things that I was so really, I mean, I told you when I sent you my review of the movie, like it really had an effect on me. Like I was crying after the movie. That doesn't happen that often. So it was. So, with Taxi Cab Ride with Jesus, what was it like? What was it like working with a director who is also co-starring with you, and sort of like what was? If you could explain a little bit, because I don't really want to give away too much about the movie.
Sure.
Because I think some of the things that are so great about the short is the way it explores the particular topics that it does.
Right.
What is it? What were the main ideas behind that movie that sort of led Dan and then you as an actor and producer, because you did produce the film as well, to make it?
Well, the advantage of that particular writer-director is Dan Brennan and I have known each other for over 30 years, and we've done a lot of films together. Most all of my films he's involved in, I'm involved in his. He's a fantastic writer, fantastic actor, and a director in his own right. And you IMDb him, you'll see all his stuff there too. So he's my brother, basically. I mean, we've collaborated so many times that we have a shorthand when we work together, an improvisational shorthand. And he came to me with that idea. He's like, let's do, because we were kind of getting antsy last fall. We hadn't done anything in a while. And he said, and we're trying to get money for bigger projects, and it just never comes through and all. So he said, let's go back to the old days, just you and I, we'll just do something. So with a small crew, kind of just bang something out together. And he gave me this idea. He said, it's you and me in a cab. Cab driver picks up Jesus. Let's go from there. And he gave me the rough outline of a story, and then he wrote. Then I liked it. I thought it was great, but I had sort of my own thoughts on the philosophy or theology of it. Then he wrote another thing. Kind of, he agreed with me on a lot of that. And we wrote another bit, and then we collaborated. We improvised, and we did a lot of stuff to round that out to kind of get to the point we were trying to get to. And as you know, the basic plot is. A cab driver down on his luck. His daughter's in the hospital. His wife is calling him, constantly trying to get him to get there because it's urgent and things are looking bad for the daughter. But he's got to make money, and he takes one last fare for that night. And he picks up this unusual stranger who claims he's Jesus, and they have this, sort of colloquy, this theological discussion, philosophical discussion about life, about man's place, God's place, what that means. And I think the whole driving force of what we were trying to get across. I mean, I come from a more what you'd consider. I wasn't raised with any particular religion. I mean, my mom was Protestant, my dad was Catholic, but I was never pushed in one direction or another. I've sort of evolved myself into what you would call like a non-dualist or a monist, or somebody who kind of believes that we are God. It's this whole universe is an expression of a greater thing than we can even imagine. But I don't personalize it or create a character for it. So that was kind of me going into it, and I think to some extent, although Dan is raised Catholic, he had some of those same ideas or feelings. So we kind of tried to apply the idea of Jesus to those thoughts and really work on what man's role is, what his own divinity is, and what self-reliance and self-responsibility, and the focus on your guiding your destiny, and that you in fact are tapped into something that's more divine, and it's not outside of you, it's inside of you, it is you, but without getting preachy about it, and without totally upending the accepted sort of structure of Jesus. We didn't want to hurt anybody or offend anybody or make it crazy, but we applied to what we believed that individual represents and what he really meant. So, and what I loved about the picture, and what Dan, to his great credit, as I would try and add things or move things around, he would steer me away, is we kept it consistent. In other words, the guy you meet in the first 5 minutes is the guy that leaves at the end. There never is this magical moment or, turn on. It's like, hey, it's up to you to take this and ingest it and decide what it is for you. And I think that's why it's been so powerful for people. I've had a lot of people react, honestly, surprisingly. I can't believe that people have reacted like you have. I mean, my people I know that I would never expect that have sent me things that said, hey, man, that was, and I think that's the reason. I think the reason is we kept it consistent. We didn't go into agenda or preachiness. We just presented a philosophy and an idea with a sort of archetypal character that people have strong feelings about one way or the other, and just let it sit there. And I think that's what worked about it. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was one of the things that was so striking to me about it, is how it's more about I mean, obviously there are religious ideas and stuff like that brought into it, but it's ultimately a philosophical debate that just happens to have faith at the center of it. And that's one of the things that was so engaging about the movie. And like you said, that consistency, like the character of Jesus that you play is very much, he's very much consistent. You can see that in play throughout all of the film, but at the same time you can also understand you can understand both people's perspectives on things without necessarily saying, oh, this is definitively how it should be. And
that's what we were trying to do. It was the most important thing to us, was to get the thought across without saying, think this way.
I know you said in your email that there were possible festivals that it's being considered for. Are there any that it's played so far?
No, not yet. I mean, I entered it into, I want to say, about 13 or 14 festivals right after we finished it in February. And right now it's in competition in something called the Indie X Fest in Los Angeles, which means it's up for some kind of awards for different categories, but the actual festival competition is if you get so many points or something, you get screened.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm not sure how that one works. That's the only one that's really been officially selected to. Everything else is the notifications won't come till May.
Yeah.
And then most of those festivals were scheduled for summer and fall anyway. And considering everything we're living in right now, I don't know how they'll do it, but it'll be out there eventually in a bunch of them. So we'll see.
Okay. Yeah, and I hope that people do have a chance to see it, because it is something that I'm somebody who I've never been particularly religious myself, but I'm always interested in religious ideas when it comes to film. I mean, I just did a rewatch recently of Scorsese's Faith trilogy of Last Temptation of Christ, Gundam, and Silence.
Great stuff. Great stuff.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like I can't really get behind too much of the more, what we consider faith-based.
Right.
Like pure flicks, just because of the fact that they're very much preaching to converted, and it's like that's one of the things that kind of, it doesn't. If I don't feel that way immediately, if I don't feel like that way going in, I don't see there's not really much I'm going to get out of it going out of it.
Exactly.
Last
Temptation was always one of my favorite pictures, one of my favorite interpretations of. He took that Kazantzakis novel and he went for it, Scorsese, and took a lot of heat for it in '88. But it was what I loved about that interpretation of the character, and what it really applies to the one we just did, is that man is both matter and energy. Man is both physical and divine, and the Jesus character is one of those special few who woke up and understood that. And the great thing about the historical or mythological Jesus, the one thing that fascinates me about that particular religion, and what I try to incorporate in my interpretation of it, is he's the one deity, if you want to call him a deity, he's the one of all these religions that actually doubted what he should do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so human. And I think that's the most important lesson, is that Garden of Gethsemane Jesus, the one that says, hey, take this cup from my hand, somebody else got to be able to do this other than me, man. And ultimately accepts his fate. And I think what a lot of people missed in the controversy of Last Temptation, and what some people may miss in our little short, is that it actually is faith reaffirming, if you believe that, because in the end, presented with the choice, presented with the doubt, that particular prophet, that particular deity, that particular son of God said, no, I'll take the tough road.
Yeah.
So the idea is that, you're cinematically presenting this guy in a human way that may seem a little abrupt or out of context and make some people uncomfortable, but ultimately the point is he makes the choice.
Yeah,
that's, you know what I mean. So I always thought that was the amazing thing about that picture.
Oh, that's the thing I have always loved about that movie, and also and that's the thing that's what's so frustrating about the controversy about that, is because so many people focus on the love scene between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. They ignore the fact that it's like, well, the Last Temptation has nothing to do with lust. It simply has to do with the temptation is to live a human life.
Yes.
And die as a human, as opposed to dying for humanity. And that's the thing that people, they got so hooked up on the
visuals and the exactly.
Like you completely missed the point of that. And that's
and in the end he rejects that.
Yeah.
That happens in the blink of an eye. That whole life that he has is in a blink of an eye. And one of my favorite scenes of all Harry Dean Stanton as I guess he's the Apostle Paul, and he's preaching, and Jesus, as an older man with wives and children, sees him preaching about Jesus and walks over to him and says, "Hey, I'm right here. I didn't die. I'm standing right here." And he says to him at the end, he says, "Oh, good. I'm glad I met you, because now I can forget all about you, because my Jesus is more important than you." Yeah. I thought it was just amazing. A great scene.
Oh, there are so many fantastic scenes in that movie. That one is one of the best. The one where Judas confronts him at the end and he realizes the truth is just amazing. Right. And then the scene where he and Judas are talking earlier, where he's basically saying it's like you have to start at the heart, as opposed to it's not just about liberation of the body, it's about liberation of the soul too.
Right.
Getting hate out of the heart. And that's those things are just, those scenes in particular are just brilliantly done by Scorsese.
And Scorsese did that picture with, I mean, relatively compared to him, no money.
Yeah.
I mean, he did that with nothing, and you got to give him credit.
So we've been on relative lockdown for about a month or so. What have you been doing to pass the time?
Well, I've been in my house here for like 6 weeks or 7 weeks now, whatever it is. But I did have a bout. I did actually contract the COVID-19, so I had about 20 days of that, and it was very, very difficult, and it was very frightening and very painful. And after about 17 days, I managed to recover, and I'm on my way back. I still don't have my full wind back yet, but it was a hell of an experience. And what I've tried to do is I'll tell you what did get me through some of the darker thoughts when you're gasping for breath a little bit and you're wondering if you're gonna get through it. The things that I tried to do was I tried to push those out. I didn't let them occupy my mind for more than 30 seconds. And what I tried to replace them with were, images of, films and stories I could make, roles I could play, and just life after this. So to sort of creatively visualize, positive things. And I've been working on setting up and trying to get a podcast together that I've been thinking about doing for months, and that's really all I can do from the inside now. And hopefully we'll get that going soon.
Okay. Well, and when you messaged me, I think it was earlier this week, and asking if I had seen the movie yet, and I hadn't, or no, it was like last Saturday, I think, when you messaged me over Facebook. Sure. And you were asking me if I was still interested in watching the short. Right. And you had told me that you had contracted it. I'm like, wow. Because I don't, like, I think you're the first person that I've been familiar with in my life over the years that has contracted it. And so it was a bit surreal, even though we had never actually met. This is the first time we're actually talking.
Sure.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shock. It was a bit, I was certainly relieved to hear that you've been getting past and you're starting to feel better.
Yeah.
That it sounds the way that you're approaching it, as far as like the way you're trying to cast out the negativity and the sort of the anxiety that comes with everything right now. I mean, I think that's a good way of looking at it and trying to get to a more positive place, even with everything that you've been through, the past few weeks. So that's definitely great to hear. And it's good to hear that, and I had big plans when my full-time job basically closed up shop last month. I had these big plans. Oh, I was going to stay busy all the time. I was going to get all of this stuff done. And I've sort of kind of still done that, but at the same time, I've also realized that, I don't have to do something every day. And I don't
Exactly.
even have to do something every other day. It's like
Right.
I can give myself time to just relax. And
Yes.
I've been fortunate enough to be able to do that. And it's just trying to pass the time here. I mean, it's
Well,
like
what you realize is, I mean, like I said, I've gotten to see a whole bunch of things in my life up close. I'm tired of being part of historical events.
mhm. I
Like
can imagine.
like I said, I stood across the street from those towers burning and watching people jumping out of windows and got ash in my hair. I did a documentary in 2005 down in Katrina, right after Katrina in New Orleans, and I was in the middle of all that. And now this and blackouts and every other thing that happens. So, but one thing you realize from these things, and they're reminders, they're lessons, is every breath, every single moment, every person that checks in on you and asks about you and that you think about, that's all it is, man. That's
Yeah.
the one line that the Jesus character says in that short that we did. When Dan's character says, we're afraid of losing someone we love, and he says, then just love them while they're here, enjoy that moment. And it's all about those moments. It's all about connecting. And one thing that's I've particularly found, especially through my only window to the world right now is like a social media window or a television window, is what I've discovered is it's most important more now than ever, and I don't think people have grasped it yet, is to connect, but just not with the people in your circle, not the people in your echo chamber or your bubble. Go seek out the ones that that anger you a little, that are completely, that you think are completely philosophically wrong. Reach out a hand and understand that whatever the behavior is that you don't agree with, it's coming from a place of fear, whether it's fear of losing their finances, fear of health, fear. So everything stems from either love or fear. So if you can empathize, and I think we need just more empathy with the other sides of these things, got to reduce the polarization of our people in our society in our world, and it takes it actually takes an effort. You have to make that effort to reach across and do that. So if anything, this virus has made me focus more on it's that.
Okay. Yeah, and with that, I mean, I think this is and I'm grateful that I've finally connected with you. As
Yes,
far
yeah,
as talking to you about your films, talking to you on your work and your career and the things that inspire you. I mean, this is it's almost it's almost like the right place at the right time for you're sure to come up at this particular moment and
yeah,
for me to watch it. And it's like, hey, you want, because I have been itching to get I have been itching to get back into podcasting, and it's like into get some episodes recorded and get some discussions with some people, and
right.
this was a really great one to
Oh, good.
start out with. So Russ, thank you very much for joining me today.
Brian, it's my pleasure. I follow you all the time on Instagram and Facebook and stuff. I love your thoughts on film and the fact that you're such a fan and a student of it. And I've always appreciated your fair and intelligent writing over the years. And so blessed and honored that you take the time to look at my work and give it an assessment. And I appreciate that.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
You got it, buddy.
I'd like to thank Russ for joining me today, and he's somebody who like I said, I've gotten to know him over the years over social media after he started sending me some of his work in 9, and it's good to finally have him on the podcast for an interview. And this was a good time for it. And I've got several more interviews that I'm going to be doing with other filmmakers, with other film fans, where we're, sometimes we're going to be talking about people's work. Sometimes we're just going to be shooting the shit on movies. And we do have plenty of others. I've got 2 more I'm recording today, and then I have 2 that I'm recording on Monday, so as well as 1 more that will be happening sometime in the future, and I'm looking forward to sharing all of those with you. That's it for me with the Sonic Cinema podcast for this time. Continue to join us at Sonic Cinema Podcast on YouTube. Thank you for getting me to 100 subscribers. It's really great to see people subscribing, and I hope you continue to enjoy the content. I've got a lot of great stuff coming up for you. Go to patreon.com/SonicCinema for $1 a month. You will not only get early access to reviews for movies that are not quite out yet, but you'll also get a running little catalog of movies or TV shows that I'm watching for the first time. And that's been something going on since the social distancing has started in mid-March, and it's been a pretty big grab bag of movies and TV. And I'm currently going through the X-Files right now. Have some thoughts on that. For now, though, this is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com. Thank you.